Okay, so today's big question on Transit Talk is what city has the best public transit in the United States? What do you think, Jack? I noticed you have a list here which you sent to me. What is the best public transit in the United States?
Well, when you consider all of the qualities that make a good transit system, I'm actually going to go ahead and say that Seattle has the best public transit, in my opinion. And I know that might sound
Seattle.
shocking, but from the standpoint of extensions that they're implementing, quality of the service, the frequency of the service, pricing, I'm going to go with that as my take as the best because, at least from the standpoint of a rider, it's easy to transfer and there's a bunch of other factors I'll get into later, but I know that might sound abnormal, but to me, I think they do a really good job of making it accessible and expanding it to the people that need it, which is really important.
Okay,
Um,
well it's definitely an interesting choice. Because I have recently been on the Seattle. What is it called? What's it called?
there's the link light,
Soundlink.
yeah, Sound Transit is the
Sound Transit, yeah. I mean, I definitely thought it was good. It was nice, smooth, clean, comfortable, connected places. But I mean, I guess it's interesting that you say that's number one. When I would certainly think that there are more there are better systems in every single aspect. There's cleaner systems, there's more expansive systems. Um,
and so that begs the
I,
question: which, in your opinion, are better than Seattle, and why?
I see. I am actually sort of conflicted because on the one hand, I do think that systems like Seattle, are like the Seattle Light Rail. They're incredibly nice. They're clean, comfortable, as we said. So on one hand, I think that the title should go to either Denver or Portland, Oregon, because they also have systems which are very much expansive and modern. But on the other hand, I'm also conflicted because I'm very much a heavy rail guy, right? So I certainly like the experience of taking it like a real train underground. Um, but I don't know. I suppose at least in my own view, you can't exactly use I guess your own personal likes to judge. Um, Although I will say I did find an article, and if you Google it online, you will often find that the New York City subway is number one. Actually, what do you think of that? Because the New York City subway actually does get a bad rep in many areas. You know.
Yeah. So I've been on it a couple times, and I've had no bad experience necessarily. Of course, the comfort isn't great, and their seats are not comfortable, at least in my opinion, and their stations are pretty dirty or run down in a lot of cases, which isn't great. But I think uh, ignoring that, of course, to have extraordinarily good coverage of the city, you can practically go anywhere on the subway, which is great. And of course, the frequencies are generally less than 10 minutes during rush hour and even during the day for nearly all lines. I think it definitely covers a lot of the boxes, but when you consider all aspects of a transit system, I think it's hard to say that it's my favorite, at least from a standpoint of a writer. It's certainly one of the most well designed, but that I don't think can be everything that makes it great.
Well, actually, speaking of well designed in terms of the New York City public transit system, I actually want to ask you this because it's often been a slight peeve of mine that whenever I go to New York or whenever I look at a map, New York City and its subway system, they only connect out eastward, right? They only connect Manhattan with Brooklyn and the Bronx. They
Hmm.
don't go over into New Jersey. They don't go out west. To go into New Jersey, you have to take a different system. You have to take the path, um, or New Jersey Transit to get across. I mean, do you think this system? Well, I guess do you think it makes sense, especially given New York's large status as a world city?
I don't personally think there's any fault with the system they have now because, like you mentioned, there's a lot of good connectivity from the southern end of Manhattan and in Penn Station. Like you can take Path or you can take New Jersey Transit, and then you can connect to other systems at Hoboken. I do think there's definitely a lot of opportunities for an actual rail connection to Staten Island rather than a ferry. It is nice that the ferry is free, but I do think an actual rail connection to the Staten Island Railroad would help. I think my bigger concern is that the northern parts of Manhattan don't have any connection at all to the western parts of New Jersey. Granted, a lot of the parts of New Jersey that are north of Hoboken and Jersey City are quite wealthy in the Alpine area, and I don't actually know if there's any desire for those people to have transit. But from the standpoint of people who are trying to get to that part of New Jersey on transit, that is where I think a key uh, a loss of the system is, and they really could put some transit connection there. I would assume quite easily over the Hudson, that could take away traffic from the George Washington Bridge or the Lincoln Tunnel that currently is heavily trafficked by cars. So I don't think
Yeah,
it's a
isn't
concern.
yeah, isn't the George Washington Bridge like the most crowded bridge in the world?
I believe
So
it is. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, public transit there, I suppose, would definitely be of use. What about like with the New York City? You did say it wasn't the most comfortable. I mean, if you go online and you actually look at, if you type in like New York City subway, I'm sure you can find a bunch of crazy people doing crazy stuff. Have you? I mean, do you think that affects? Do you think that plays a major part in like, I don't know, New York City subway was his status as being considered um, in among the best, or perhaps even among the worst?
I don't think it really honestly changes people's opinions of it being a good or bad system, because I think many people will have a favorable opinion of the system itself. uh, I haven't had any personal experiences with like these like negative experiences, and I think a lot of it is just people like I think a lot of people have negative stereotypes about subways in general, especially in major cities, that these like images online continue to perpetuate. But I generally don't think it changes people's perceptions of the system. I know many people like to say it's like infamous for being dirty and whatnot, but of course people will continue to use it, and it has record ridership. I also just a quick side note on a personal level. I think I'm disappointed that the system doesn't really seem to want to make improvements to comfort, because I'm disappointed in the new design of their new rail cars they just recently purchased. I'm forgetting what exactly they are, but they chose to have more of an airline style seating rather than the line seating with places for people to stand in the middle, which I think will make it really difficult for standees to be on the train. So I'm disappointed that they're
Oh
really not
yeah,
caring about comfort.
yeah. No, I heard about that. I mean, I don't know. I feel like in terms of the transit system itself, what is there currently in New York is certainly impressive. By objective means, but I mean, yeah, I'd have to also say, I do remember that one of their expansions, one of their like most recent expansions, like a couple years back, was what was it, the 7 train to Hudson Yards, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And that didn't really serve any objective purpose. It really felt more just like for the PR, or to say that the mayor or that the politicians could have done something. So I mean, I guess New York City definitely could do much. New York City definitely could claim the number one spot, in my opinion. But right now, it's perhaps there are a few factors which make it fall slightly short.
Yeah, and I do want to add though that to New York City's credit, they do a really good job of disposing their train cars. So recently, I believe they retired I believe it's the R62, uh, which were the ones they were operating from the 60s. And instead of just scrapping them, they decided to drop them into, I believe, the Chesapeake Bay near Delaware, and keep them as artificial reefs, which I think is a great job of helping preserve local environments and also using a structure that could be applied in that instance. And I think they do a good job of that.
Oh, for sure. So I want to actually see. I'm looking at your list again of the what you consider to be the best public transit systems in the country, and you have Eugene, Oregon, as one of them, and that doesn't. I would never think. I've been to Eugene, but not on Eugene's public transit. I certainly would not think that they had the best. Why do you think it's good?
Well, I have to, if I'm being honest, it's mostly driven by a public experience or my own personal experience on the system. Of course, that was I believe the first time in my life that I'd been on a bus rapid transit system, and I was very confused mentally at the point of what it was, because I was thinking it was some kind of light rail, but at the same time it wasn't. But I was very impressed by the design of the system. They make it easy to access the stations. The buses have their own lanes for a lot of the route. And of course, that's just one part of the system. The system also has bus lines all over the Eugene Springfield metro area that operate at very good frequencies. Of course, it helps that it's a university town with a lot of people who don't have cars and who could benefit from public transit. But the system in general does a really good job of connecting Eugene and Springfield, and also connecting to other outlying or just other bus lines that would connect into the Emerald Express BRT. And I think they do a really good job of operating a BRT system in the city that works for it. I think college towns in general are really good test cities and good cities in general for BRT. So I know it's surprising that I would consider it, but I think they were one of the first cities to implement like a nearly a flawless BRT system that meets all of the BRT requirements, and they do it really well. And that's what I think is so good about it.
So do you think there's an actual advantage to using like BRT? Because like for example, how would you compare Eugene's system with like in an objective manner with that of New York subway, for example? Because I'd say that for most of these points, frequency and network expansion, New York also does pretty pretty well.
Well, I think if I'm looking at it from the experience of a passenger, the comfort level of Eugene is better than the New York subway, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
astronomically, yeah.
And I think back to the point you brought up about why BRT in general, I think, of course, light rails are probably going to be better than BRT from both a time standpoint and a comfort standpoint in some cases. But the one thing, at least for BRT, is that it's a more cost-effective option, and that I think is why we see it in places like Eugene, whose city budget like isn't as high as a city like Portland, who can implement widespread light rail systems and bus systems
I,
and even commuter rail systems.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, when you compare it to the budget. I mean, I still like when I took Portland's, it was really nice. Portland's what was it called? Is
The
Portland
TriMet,
Max or is
yeah, the light rail I believe is called the Max Light Rail.
the Max Light Rail?
I'm curious
Okay.
about your experience with that because I haven't been on that light rail in almost 9 years.
It was in 9 years. Wow. Well, it's actually really nice. It was accessible, like in the sense that you could get on it from a pretty decent from different from pretty decent variety of points. There we go. And then you just take it's really all just connected downtown, which was nice and comfortable, nothing too complex. It's really those sorts of cities with those sorts of more newer light rail systems like Portland, Salt Lake City, Denver. Oh, Salt Lake City was quite nice too. Um, that I really do quite like, especially when compared to how many older systems are just becoming more and more dilapidated by the day.
And when
But
and when you were in Portland, did you have the chance to ride the WES commuter train at all?
I did not, unfortunately. I knew it existed, but but I did not get the chance to actually take the train.
I'm also noticing on your list that you mentioned Washington D.C. as one of your top transit systems, and I'm fascinated by that because I haven't been on that subway in a while either, and have only used it, I believe, once. Uh, and I know that their train cars, many of them are quite old from the 70s or 80s. I know they're making improvements, but I'm curious your perspectives on that system.
Wait, hold on. Just before that, I'm since you said like you haven't, it's not you haven't been on these systems, right? With DC and Portland, it's you haven't been on them in a long time. So are there any like I don't know. I guess we'll say like subway systems, like heavy rail. Are there any heavy rail systems in the U.S. that you haven't been on?
I haven't been on anything. I mean, I guess if you count anything that Miami has as heavy rail, I haven't been. I haven't been anywhere in the southeast at all.
Uh huh.
Um,
Okay, so no Miami or Atlanta.
no, and then I haven't been on Philadelphia, but I believe I will experience that this summer, hopefully, which would be exciting because
Oh,
that
nice. Yeah.
is it seems very interesting to me the way they have like elevated portions, but also underground portions, and
I also have not been on what is it, SEPTA? Um but from what I've heard, be prepared for New York City subway level comfort levels.
yeah, that's what I've been expecting, which should be exciting.
Okay. Wow. So but basically all the other like heavy rail systems you've been on.
Oh yeah, and that reminded me. I haven't been on Los Angeles, but I've heard things from you about it.
Oh man, that's a whole nother story. But you know, we're focused on the best public transit systems, not the worst. Um, you know, just as a side tangent, Los Angeles is number one worst for sure. But but back to the Washington D.C. subway. Um, I mean, you know, I really thought that amongst, you know, heavy rail systems, it was quite nice. You know, I used to have you know, there a few summers back, I had a few summer camps in DC, but we didn't like the hotel, the Airbnb that we stayed in. It was not like within DC itself. It was like way out into the Maryland suburbs. So, you know, every morning I had to take a bus to, you know, the terminus of the Red Line and take it all the way down into DC. You know, 2 hours one way. So I just, you know, as a morning commute, I honestly just really liked that. You know, it was comfortable, it was fast. I guess the only thing that really wasn't so great about it, which, you know, I'm sure is definitely a factor as well, is the cost. You know, DC is not, it's not like New York where there's a flat fee. It's one where you have to pay like as you go, and it's, you know, pretty expensive to say the least.
Yeah, and did you have a chance to try any of the modes in the city, like the streetcar or any of the buses?
I've actually not tried the streetcar before. Their buses, I think they're just standard. You know, I would say that, you know, for effectively the accompaniment bus system in a lot of American cities, it's just mostly the same experience. I did, however, once try, for example, the MARC train, the commuter rail of Washington D.C. That was also quite nice. Um, it was actually my first commuter rail experience in America. I took it from Baltimore to Washington D.C. And honestly, you know, it was. I feel like back then I was perhaps, you know, more excited to be on the commuter rail than actually taking in what the experience was like. Um, but yeah, it was quite nice. I don't know. You said you haven't been on it in a long time. I mean, do you did you have any impressions when you did take it? When you did go to DC?
Yeah, so I've been on the subway once, and I took the red line from I don't actually remember where in DC I got on, but I took it to Bethesda, Maryland. Um, and
Oh, yeah.
the only memory I have is that the stations were really beautiful looking, and that they had really long escalators.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. The interiors, they're like I mean, they're like I always think of them as like nuclear like shelters, you know? Cuz
yeah, they
like
do
they
look
seem
that way. Yeah,
so uh-huh.
but I remember enjoying it because it was quick and it was also raining, and I liked the rainy weather, so the whole experience was a good one because it was like I got to spend 30 minutes on the subway, and I really enjoyed the stations and where I was going to as well. So it was nice all around.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. Again, like with the DC Metro, with the DC public transit system, how do you think that compares with everything else? Because I would say like on my list, you know, Washington D.C. is definitely. I actually put it as I actually put it as number two on my list because you know I just really liked it. I think it's much better than it's much more comfortable than New York's. That's for sure.
Yeah, certainly I would agree on the comfort point. And it probably helps to have been built way after New York. I don't know that I have enough personal experience on it to rank it, although I do only have positive memories of it, so I think that helps. And of course, they are extending it to a lot of places. I believe they're extending it to Dulles Airport at some point, which would be amazing if that were to happen.
Some point. Oh my god, dude! At some point, um, they're also saying didn't they also say that they were going to build a purple line like in the suburbs connecting like the northern suburbs of
Oh
DC?
yeah, I heard about that recently. I believe that's going to be a light rail, possibly that might actually
Is
be
it?
getting built. Or I heard there was going to
Huh.
be a streetcar that goes from I think either Rockford or Silver Spring all the way to New Carrollton, which I think would be huge.
Huh. Wow. That would be huge. It's just a question of how many decades is it going to take?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
How many centuries actually? Because like I remember distinctly like the first time I visited Washington D.C. was when I was like 10. And when I was there, I noticed that you know there was an extension on the maps like saying to Like there were extension, like I think posters or something saying that like they were going to connect it to Dulles Airport, and then here we are today, and there's still no Dulles Airport extension, which I don't know. I
And
guess
well, for an airport being 40 minutes out of the city, it would definitely benefit from one.
yeah. I mean, I guess as a side tangent, it also doesn't make sense because I mean Dulles Airport. That's like it's not a minor airport. It's like super major, but yet and what's even more interesting is that like it's not super far away either. Like they're almost there. They just have to push slightly more. But I don't know. Bureaucracy is one hell of a drug.
Yeah, for sure. The other interesting thing with the DC Metro that what you said made me think of is that it was built the same year as BART, and also around the same time as the MARTA in Atlanta. And you mentioned the price aspect, and I wonder if those kinds of like the '70s systems, who all use similar rolling stock, decided that like they wanted to charge higher fares, or because they all serve wealthy suburbs, whether they could charge more. So I think the pricing around those kinds of systems is really interesting.
Actually, no, I have been on Marta in Atlanta, but I don't. Was it fare based or was it flat fee based? I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure it was flat fee based. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know. However, I will say that since I'm not from the Bay Area, when I did take BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit, I was prepared to have to pay a bit for transit. I was not prepared to have to pay so much for transit. You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah, yeah.
I mean the routes, just basically a one way ticket on the route I took was how much was it? Like $7, $8. Whereas in New York you can go anywhere on 275, which is just absolutely insane. I don't know. Since you live by BART, what do you think of the system as a whole?
Well, I have a lot of mixed opinions on it. I think it can be useful in a lot of cases for people who live on the west side of the bay who want to go to the East Bay because it actually has a lot of connectivity in that regard, and you can go to many parts of the different East Bay counties. The issue is, I think, with the East Bay itself, is that the system was largely built for one reason, which was to take wealthy commuters who live in places like Walnut Creek or in Pleasanton or in Livermore
Mm-hmm.
to take this
Yeah.
system into the bigger cities of Oakland and San Francisco. So if you look in the East Bay map, you'll notice it actually has really wide stop spacing, which avoids a lot of low-income communities, which I think is, of course, good for the people who are traveling from the suburbs. But I think it's also it kind of skews out lower-income people from public transit in the region, which is I think really problematic. And I think they also can capitalize on charging really high prices because the bulk of their commute ridership in the morning and PM rush hours are generally wealthy people who live in the East Bay.
Yeah. I mean, I've also noticed that like even on the West Bay, you know, if you just look at it, like the first time I looked at the BART transit map, I was sort of I guess intrigued by on the West Bay how all four lines just run together for like quite an extended bit of distance. So even on the West Bay, the bar completely bypasses, for example, the western areas of downtown San Francisco, like by, what is it, Golden Gate Park,
Yeah.
um, which I guess that certainly really plays into that. That also, is a part of the, you know, designed for commuter riders and not to serve the city as a whole. But I don't know. I guess what about like the experience of BART in itself? Do you think it's comfortable?
I believe yeah, the seats are I think quite comfortable. I've never experienced it myself, but there has been a lot of violence on BART and also a lot of
Oh, really?
contaminated drug needles. Violence, I guess, has gone down with COVID, which has been nice, and certainly ridership has dropped a lot. And they're making improvements all around. At one point, actually, the tunnels that the trains would run in were extraordinarily loud. So they've fortunately done track work since then to correct for that. And they've also got new rolling stock, which has helped too, because the train cars were from the '70s and were showing their age. So it's nice that they're making improvements, but there's still a long way to go, I think. And
Hmm.
you've actually ridden it more recently than I have, so I'm curious what you think.
I mean, I when I took it, it was like I said, it was, it felt pretty standard. The trains do go quite fast, I had noticed, which I guess is necessary since the BART actually does go quite a bit of distance. But I guess one thing that was really surprising is that BART actually is a lot more, shall I say, run down than I had expected. Because exactly the way you described it as well. BART was built primarily for the rich suburban commuters, going in and out of San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. So I was sort of expecting there to be, you know, less, shall we say, of the violence and the drug usage as you
Hmm.
noted, which is a problem that's more prevalent with New York City since it's more connective of the inner city itself. But I mean, I guess I was just really surprised by that in BART. Um, yeah, especially since it's not you know especially since BART doesn't go to a lot of the more rundown areas of San Francisco. Um, I don't know. I was surprised again.
Yeah, certainly. I think people have a lot higher expectations for it coming in, and then are disappointed afterwards. And I mean, to BART's credit, they aren't the only system that's operating in the Bay Area, and there are other actual San Francisco-based systems that I think are quite a lot better.
Actually, that is, since we're talking about the San Francisco Bay Area, like San Francisco and the Bay Area, transit, you actually take the Caltrain to school, don't you?
Yeah, I do during the school year.
Dang, that is so lucky. I'll never go to, that is. I wish I could take commuter rail to school every day, but unfortunately, there's none in Cincinnati, Ohio. But I mean, what do you think about Caltrain? Like the route and its comfort?
Uh, well, if you asked me a year ago, I would say it's essentially a flawless system because they do a really good job of operating a variety of services. They have like limited express, kind of like in Japan, where they make like 5 or 6 stops along their way, and then they also have regular limited services, which skip maybe half of the stops, and then you have the locals, which make all the stops. And I think having a wide variety of trains makes it easy to also have a lot of frequency, but also make sure that the time to go from San Jose to San Francisco or even Gilroy to San Francisco is still pretty low. And they also cater well to students, mostly because the stations are near a lot of schools. But they also even have there's a school in San Jose called Bellarmine College Prep, which has their own train station, and Caltrain does a good job of keeping the train schedules aligned to run with the school system. But I think even outside of that, they got new rolling stock in 2004 to accommodate their new express services, which is quite comfortable and the ride quality is really good. Unfortunately, the older train sets, the gallery cars, are not as comfortable and have actually been showing a lot of their age, and really can't you can't really get a good ride on them anymore if you're traveling at speed, which a lot of times trains are doing these days, where they're barely running any local services with COVID. And I think the COVID issue is actually important to talk about with Caltrain because most train systems aren't even running at all, and some are offering very limited services. But Caltrain has managed for the last 5 months to operate 2 trains per hour every single hour from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m., which means that every station on the line is getting at least 1 train per hour, which I think is great. And even on the weekends, they still continue to maintain that service, which is good for maintaining ridership once the pandemic ends.
Yeah, I mean, wait, 2 hours? Sorry, 2 trains per hour?
Yeah, that's what they're doing now, and they don't make all the stops, so some stations only get one, but it's still quite high.
That's not bad. That's actually pretty good, especially considering how like a lot of systems around the country are just like they were just like, nope, we're not serving these areas anymore.
Yeah, it is important to note that before the pandemic, I believe Caltrain was the third highest or the third best system in the country for ridership per mile because it's only a 78-mile line and it gets close to 65,000 people per day, so quite a lot of people for the short length of the train.
Actually, you actually mentioned before that like Caltrain. So I'm actually not sure, but Caltrain does like the express and the local trains.
Yeah, prior to the pandemic, they had 3 tiers of service, and right now during the pandemic, they're offering two.
Huh? Cause like I mean the only place I really know that does that is basically like the New York subway, which
Yeah.
runs the express. What is it like the yeah the express and the local trains. I mean, honestly, what do you think about like this whole system? Because the first time I was in New York, it confused the hell out of me. Like you had to look underneath to see, whether it was served by. You have to look underneath the station names to see whether the station was served by express or only local or whatever. And you can't just look and be like, oh, the line runs this way, right?
Yeah, and I think for Caltrain, it's interesting. I would imagine the bulk of the ridership knows like what trains are express and what are not. They also do a good job of numbering the trains. So like the 300 series is the Baby Bullets, the ultimate, the limited express. Then the 200's the limited, and then the 100's the local. So that helps. And then at least prior to the pandemic, most people generally knew the schedule because the trains usually came at the same time every hour. So the limited would come at like 5:20, and then or on 5:26, 27:20, and then the Baby Bullets would come at like maybe 5:45, 6:45. So it was relatively
Hmm.
easy to understand, I would think.
So let me ask you this. About the Bay Area in general, because I'm pretty sure, if I'm not wrong, Caltrain, like the terminus of the Caltrain, is not like within the heart of downtown San Francisco, is it?
Uh, well, in my opinion, I actually think it's a good location where it is now because well, for a lot of people on the West Bay, it's actually really easy to get to baseball games from there, which is a positive. And then you're also, it's now going to connect to one the Transbay Transit Center. So the Salesforce Transit Center is essentially near there. And then you also have just generic light rail connections that can take you almost anywhere in the city. And then you also have, like I said, the buses. So generally, I think it isn't in the financial district of the city, and you do have to maybe go 20 minutes on the light rail to get there. But it's still, I think, relatively well located, and it has good transit connections, which is important for people who want to take the train to and from the city, I think.
Do you think San Francisco like actually do you think like San Francisco does a good job of connecting all its parts together? Because when I was in San Francisco recently, I did notice that there was a distinct lack of transit to the Golden Gate Bridge, which was quite surprising since it is like the San Francisco attraction.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately that's more of a problem of the SFMTA right now, who has continued to refuse to reinstate a lot of bus lines that they were operating pre-pandemic, and a lot of transit agencies aren't operating a lot of their really important lines, which is really unfortunate. I do think, in my opinion, there is actually really good connectivity within San Francisco itself. That's not true for the entirety of the Bay, but San Francisco generally has very good connectivity between light rail, BART, and Caltrain, which makes it fairly easy to get around the city. It doesn't necessarily take a short amount of time in a lot of cases, but there, at least pre-pandemic, was a lot of good connectivity, and I can understand that right now it's not great.
Yeah, I mean, the system. I again, the system definitely could expand more. Because there are a lot of unconnected or underserved areas, especially too. For example, when connecting, if you want to go from San Jose to, for example, downtown San Francisco, like what are your options? You have to like either mosey onto the Caltrain and then get on another form of transit, or like make your way to the East Bay and take the BART up. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would say Caltrain is actually a good option for that because you can get most places in downtown San Francisco from the Caltrain station, and they are building an extension of BART, which currently ends in Berryessa, so a couple like 1 to 2 miles northeast of San Jose, but they are going to extend that into Santa Clara eventually and through the San Jose Caltrain station. So that'll be, I think, positive for the region. But right now you'd have to take a bus or light rail to get out to Berryessa in the first place. So it's not great, and I think that's where the San Francisco network as a whole, the entire Bay Area, kind of falls flat, which is that there isn't a lot of good regional connectivity, but there is within cities themselves.
Actually, I also noticed that since we were talking about the Caltrain run times, the BART like frequency also isn't great, is it?
Yeah, it's terrible right now because prior to the pandemic, many of the lines were operating in rush hour probably every 10 minutes or so, or even less than that, and now on weekends it's every 30 minutes, which is unacceptable to me.
Every 30 minutes. Oh my god.
And and for a heavy rail line, I would expect it to be much higher than that. especially when these trains can operate at relatively high speeds. And then during the weekdays, I believe it's 20 minutes for most lines, which is fine. But I would hopefully want to see that improved in the coming months.
I mean, I honestly think that's pretty crazy. Like 20 minutes, 20 minutes per train in like the San Francisco Bay Area, like the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
cause
terrible.
yeah, cause like I mean New York or Chicago or wherever else. I mean, like the max is like what 15, 12. So, that was definitely a surprise when I realized, holy crap, if I miss, when I was in San Francisco, if I miss this train, I'm gonna have to wait another 30 minutes, which was just, not good.
Yeah, and I also saw that. So when you went to Denver recently after you went to San Francisco, and I've actually never been on that train system at all. And I know you mentioned it as one of your favorites. So I'm curious what made Denver one of your favorites, and what the regional connectivity is like there.
Well, well, the connectivity for Denver is certainly nice. It connects to all its suburbs. It connects to Aurora. It connects to Lakewood. It connects. There's also um, a pretty fancy, I guess, line to Denver International Airport, which is quite comfortable. Um,
Hmm.
but so in terms of connectivity, I think Denver is pretty nice. I would say in terms of comfort, it's also it's like I mentioned, for example, Portland or Salt Lake City standards. I guess the only thing that maybe brings it slightly down on my list is just the pricing. Not that it's super expensive, but that Denver actually still has zones of travel, right? Like you need to pay an additional fare if you want to go like into the core, or if you want to go like within zone 2 or zone 3. So, I mean, I guess, I just personally don't like zones. I would rather be able to pay for, a ticket or a pass and just go anywhere. But, they have to do what they have to do. So, Denver, I think for me it's a solid, um certainly, a very valiant system, and one which is it's definitely worth the comfort and the price for what you're getting. Um, I don't know. You haven't been on Denver's, but like with those other ones, you also said you hadn't been on Portland's in a while. Have you been on, like, for example, Salt Lake City's or any other modern light rails?
Um, I believe I've been on Salt Lake City's once, and it was a very long time ago. I've seen it quite a lot, and I know that it goes to the airport, which is widely used to my knowledge, and I know it goes to the University of Utah. So I've been to Salt Lake City a lot of times, but I've rarely actually ever used the light rail. But I know that they do a really good job. I've finally used the commuter rail for the purpose of just checking out the commuter rail. So I rode it like 3 stations.
Oh,
And
in Salt Lake City?
yeah,
Oh, wait, what's it called?
it's called the Front Runner.
Front Runner. That's right. That's right. From Ogden to Provo. Yeah.
Yeah, and I rode it to Layton, which is a couple stops north of Salt Lake City, and it's very similar to just a standard commuter rail because they use the bi-level cars. But I think in general, my impressions of Salt Lake City are incredibly positive because they uh, have a very integrated system with streetcars, light rail, commuter rail, and they also have I believe they recently built a BRT system in Provo. I think that's near BYU. I believe it's where they built it. So that is also a positive for them. So I'd actually really like to use their system more.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I thought San Francisco's light rail, it was fantastic. Also the airport line, it was like it goes out to the airport, right? There's a stretch where there's not suburbia on either side, and like you get a nice view of the mountains in the background. That was quite nice. Which I guess is also a positive of a lot of these systems. For example, Seattle's or New York's gives you some pretty good views of downtown Seattle or Manhattan, respectively. Um, but there's also some other systems which I'm trying to think about. For example, the ones in Texas. Have you ever been on any systems in Texas?
I haven't, unfortunately. The only time I've ever been to Texas was I was in DFW Airport connecting, but I haven't actually been
Hmm.
to any of their cities yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, I've been on. the Dallas, the DART, the Dallas Area Rapid Transit, as well as the
Hmm.
Houston Q Line streetcar. Um, I honestly would have to say that Dallas is decent, right? It's not super amazing. It's decent because it connects a bunch of places. You know, it connects Plano. It connects what was it, Denton. Um,
And it connects with the
and
H in there too, right?
It does, yeah. It also, there's also a line, a very long line, albeit. Um, well, actually, it's not even a line. It's just the same line that goes to Plano also goes all the way to DFW Airport. So I think in terms of the Dallas area transit, like the public transit available, the DART is certainly serviceable, right? Especially it also connects with what is it called? Uh,
The Trinity Rail Express commuter train.
Yeah, exactly. Trinity Express Rail to Fort Worth. Um, yeah, Dallas is serviceable. It's quite nice. You should experience it. It's also the Dart, like the cars themselves. They're not common, I guess.
Hmm. And
they're they're more. Mm-hmm.
have you been on any of the commuter rail services too at all there?
In Texas,
Yeah, or either in Dallas, the new Tex Rail or the TRE.
I've unfortunately no. When I was in Dallas, I unfortunately like didn't have time to go to Fort Worth. Um, Trying to think. Like, actually, have I been on any commuter services anywhere? I have. I've been on the Metro in Chicago.
And how's that?
And
Because I've been on the metro, but I was only on their electric line, so I don't actually know the standard experience.
well, the one that I took also was I kind of cheesed it. I just took the subway. I took the what is it, the L
Hmm.
to Jefferson Park Station on the Blue Line, which is also a metro station. So I just took that into downtown Chicago. Um, I guess for me at least, the most comparable example, the most comparable service to Chicago's was I guess really the MBTA, the Massachusetts Bay Transport Authority in Boston, in the sense that you're just given some leather seats and then that's it. um, yeah, nothing special like at all. They do connect a bunch of places though. There's a lot of spokes.
Yeah, I've that's what it seems like, and I think I would imagine it's also quite similar to Caltrain and probably the Virginia Railway Express because they use the same rolling stock.
Oh, do they? That's quite
Yeah,
nice.
those are I
Hmm.
believe the three systems in the U.S. that use the gallery train sets, which personally are not my favorite anymore because they're quite uncomfortable at speed, and they're generally just outdated because of the way that they have the most of the second deck or the second level cut out so that conductors can check tickets, which I think is also an outdated practice.
I mean, I suppose they have to, you know, make money somehow, eh?
Yeah, yeah, of course. But I think at this point, at least when I was on Metra, they would you could buy tickets on board, or you could just show the conductor your ticket when you walk on. So they didn't actually have people roaming the corridors checking for tickets. At least that was when I
Hmm.
was on it a couple years ago.
Yeah. Actually, have you been on speaking of Chicago, have you been on the L before?
I have, and I've actually been on all of the lines because when I was there in
Oh, same,
2014,
same.
I tried to make sure I went out to Skokie to ride on the yellow line, which is actually quite fun.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. The two stations on the yellow line.
Yeah. How was your experience with it?
Since I live in the Midwest, I've been to Chicago more times than there are atoms in the universe. That might be an exaggeration, but um I mean, I suppose like every single time it's a little different just because every single time we sort of stayed in different areas. Um, there's some areas like the Red Line in the south side of Chicago, or a lot of stations on the Blue Line, which are really just so run down. But then
Hmm.
there are also some stations, like for example the Purple Line. The the They all have names, but I keep forgetting. I'm always forgetting what they are. The Purple Line, like up in Evanston, which was quite nice. It also gave you a few small glimmers of Lake Michigan. Um, but one thing I do always make sure to do, which I also think is quite nice, is I always every time I go to Chicago, every time I have a chance to take the L, I always make sure to take a Blue Line train all the way to O'Hare Airport. Um, just because like again, as I said before, with Washington D.C., you know, or unlike Washington D.C., Chicago connects you to the airport, right? Which you know is quite nice. Also, speaking of speaking of I guess the specialties of each line. I don't know if you've had this, but like the Pink Line, um, you get some very nice views of downtown Chicago as you're coming in, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I don't know if I was only on the Pink Line when I used it for an actual purpose of taking it somewhere for only a couple stops, and it was at night, so I didn't really get to see much of the city. Um, and I've only been on the Pink Line, at least I think it was to Morgan Station, so I really haven't been on it out to like I think its terminus is 54th and Cermak, so I haven't actually been out there.
Yeah. Have you been on like for example have you been on the Red Line like south side or
No,
north
the
side?
furthest south I've been is to Roosevelt, where Soldier Field is, so not very far south.
Mm, okay. What do you think about like Chicago's like transit situation in general? Like with the interplay between the L as well as Metra.
Well, I think the interplay is kind of non-existent because there really is. You have to you have to you have
Yeah.
to you have to
Yeah,
walk
yeah,
either from the OTC or Union Station to the Loop. Uh, so there's not really great connectivity. I think there's a station near LaSalle Street, but also the Metro Electric Corridor, which I've used and is useful, is not near any station for the Loop at all, which is kind of disappointing. But I think the individual systems themselves, both Metra and the L, are quite good. And I know that the Chicagoland area also has quite good buses too, even in the suburbs, which I would want to learn more about. And I think they have quite good rolling stock on those, so I'm excited to learn more about those as well.
I think like actually I also have a I guess more unique experience, which is I have been on the South Shore line. Um,
Hmm.
the one that connects South Bend, Indiana to Chicago. I took it from Dune Park, like by Indiana Dunes, and into downtown Chicago. Which the system itself it wasn't super well. Actually, no, it was kind of special because it wasn't the track there is sort of famous, I guess, because it's
Cause
not
is it
completely isolated.
and it street
Yeah.
runs in Michigan City or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Too.
yeah. It goes like on the street, like by houses, physically on the street in some areas, which was interesting. When you have when you're like on the street, just when you're passing by on the train, just like you would on a car. Um, but I don't know. I guess in terms of like connectivity, Chicago is certainly connected to a bunch of its Chicago is certainly connected. Period. Actually, because there there's the airports and there's the Amtrak services in Illinois. Sorry, but I mean the commuter lines just snaking out of Chicago. They're huge. They're massive compared to even like San Francisco, for example.
Yeah, and I think the Amtrak point you mentioned is also I think important because I've actually been to Chicago, but I flew into Milwaukee and took the train into Chicago, and I think that's also
Oh,
a
you took
really
the Hiawatha?
yeah, and I think that's actually a good connection because a lot of times it's cheaper to fly into Milwaukee because you get Southwest services, which are generally cheaper than flying United into O'Hare or even American,
Oh,
I guess.
really? Really? I would have expected you to like if you're going Southwest, fly to Midway.
Yeah, that too. Although for this trip we were also ending in Milwaukee, so it was convenient to fly into Milwaukee first and go to Chicago, and then when
Mm.
we went
Mhm.
back to Milwaukee, we could just fly out. Um, and of course, now with Southwest flying to O'Hare, I think the connection will be slightly less important.
Mhm. For sure. So I wanna since we've covered like we've covered actually most of the major like public transit systems. I guess I guess a few others like for example, have you been on ooh, well, we actually haven't talked about Boston's yet. What do you think about Boston?
From what I've been on it, I've enjoyed it a lot. I really want to try the commuter rail, the MBTA commuter rail, but I haven't done that yet. But I've rode the red, orange, and green lines. I was disappointed by the green line because I expected it to be a lot quicker. To go from like
Oh
the
yeah.
Kenmore area, like where Fenway Park is, into the city, but it took close to 30 minutes, and especially with crowds, it operates really slowly. Um,
Well,
but
yeah. I mean, the
otherwise,
Green Line. It is a tram, right? It's not a subway.
yeah, I was still expecting it to be maybe like Muni in San Francisco, where they can still operate relatively quickly when they're underground. That said, though, I think overall the system is quite good. I guess another disappointment was that their airport connection is pretty horrible. Because I was hoping to take it from the airport into the city, but you have to take, I believe it's like almost a 10-minute bus ride even to the station in the first place, which is quite inconvenient.
I mean, see, I have gone to Boston within the past year. And we actually like, so I guess to preface, I have also been on the red, orange, and green lines. Pro tip, um, you know, well, not so pro tip, but just whenever taking the green line, I guess expect less. It's not as fast as you would expect. It's not as comfortable as you expect. It's not as quiet as you would expect. But it is serviceable. And like this past time I went to Boston, where I actually did take the blue line, the one that connects you to the airport. And I mean, I see in terms of connection with the airport, it's definitely not like Chicago, where the train takes you right where the subway takes you right there, right into the airport. But it's also not like DC, where there is no there is no connection at all.
It's certainly nice that it
Um,
exists.
it does exist, right? And your options are basically number one, take the Silver Line, which is basically like buses, like a bus transit system, and that takes you directly across the bay into Boston. Or you can take like the free airport shuttle to the Blue Line station, and that's what we did, which I thought was actually pretty convenient. Because like since it is the airport, the buses are running. The shuttle buses, they are running like all the time. And the Blue Line, it's quite nice, serviceable.
Yeah, it's good to know because I did not realize there was a free airport shuttle, and I recently learned about the Silver Line. So I think I'm more impressed now than I was when I was there, when I had little knowledge.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, man. When if when you go to Boston, don't take the Silver Line. I don't like it. It's just buses. There's nothing special. It just takes you zoop into the air, like from the airport, and then you're under. There's a tunnel. You cross underneath the tunnel, and then you're in Boston. Right? There's nothing special. You don't get the thrill of taking the train. That being said, though, if you want to take the if you want to take the blue line, you do need to transfer if you're not going like I guess city center, right? Because the blue line really only takes you from Wonderland,
Hmm.
um, which is out by the
Northeast.
north of, yeah, and then it basically just goes. I forgot what the terminus station was. Was it
I think
Haymarket?
it's Bowdoin.
Bowdoin? I don't know, but the terminus of that is basically like close to city center Boston. So if you're going anywhere else, you need to transfer.
Yeah, and I've never been on it, and I might when I'm there. I believe I'm going to the summer, so I'm excited to see what new transit experiences I can get.
Fun, very very fun. I don't know. Are there any other major cities that you think should be considered like at all? I don't know. In terms of, I guess maybe more like smaller light rail systems, like St.
Well,
Louis or
I guess
Phoenix.
just because we're here, I think I'm curious your thoughts on Cincinnati because as many would consider it a relatively big city and would expect it to have decent public transit.
Let me just say this. Ohio has public transit. It's just all up in Cleveland. Ohio has a line of heavy rail, the red line of the Cleveland's RTA. Ohio has light rail. Um, Cleveland has the blue and the green lines. We here in Cincinnati also have a little teeny tiny red light rail system. It basically makes an eight shape, and it literally connects nowhere. It only connects the downtown of downtown, right? So imagine, I don't know, in San Francisco, if it only connected, if for example, like I don't know, Chinatown in downtown San Francisco, if it had its own little tiny light rail line, that's basically the equivalent of what it is. So this is definitely not the right episode to talk about Cincinnati. If we do one about the worst public transit system, I will definitely be sure to bring up Cincinnati then. So rest assured.
Yeah, and then I guess in terms of other big cities, I think we discussed Atlanta already, and I think there's a lot of mixed opinions in general on
Atlanta's
that system.
okay, but Atlanta's I mean the Marta is okay, but it doesn't connect like anywhere. It just makes it's basically like a plus sign, effectively.
Yeah, and I think also the other one that it would be that we haven't talked about would be Minneapolis, which I haven't been on. I don't know if you have, but I know that they
Yeah,
have
me neither. Me
commuter
neither.
rail. They have a lot of light rail. My brother's been on it, but I don't remember exactly what his experience was. I know they get a lot of good reviews though because they have an extensive light rail system and they have a commuter rail system that they're also going to extend, I believe, to St. Cloud eventually.
Oh, nice. I don't know. I mean, I really, I don't know. I really don't know much about Minneapolis public transit system. I would imagine, like based on what I have heard about it, that it is somewhat similar to just the other standard light rail systems. Um, so I'm just not sure. I guess of the quality. That's
Yeah,
really.
they
Hmm.
they do have an airport connection, so I that's a definite point they get there. That
It's not DC. It's not the Washington Metro.
yeah, and you can also go beyond the airport to the Mall of America, which I would assume appeases people.
Hmm. Oh yeah, people love their shopping. The biggest mall in is it the world or is it just the
I
country?
think it's just the U.S. because I believe there's a mall in
Okay.
Edmonton that's larger.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. But I guess maybe for closing sake, let's say you had to choose one city to end all of it. I don't know. Where would you put? Would you still choose Seattle as you said at the very beginning?
I think I would still say Seattle has the best. I think in terms of the system in general, I'm actually going to say Park City, Utah is my ultimate favorite because it's free, it's frequent, and it covers essentially the entire city, and you can connect to the UTA buses that run into Salt Lake. So that would be my ultimate favorite. But I think in terms of an actual citywide system, Seattle does a really good job.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely wouldn't disagree that Seattle is good, but I think for my final pick, I would honestly have to say, um, I guess I just really like Salt Lake City's the light rail system. Although then again, I am still heavily biased towards heavy rail, so I don't know. I might change this later on. Um, but yeah, I mean, I suppose if the best system, the best of anything is really to be decided. It really depends on everybody's personal and individual experiences. So for anyone listening, definitely recommend if you go to a place, try out and experience the public transit within that city, because it differs as we've seen. It differs wildly from place to place, and some cities, although they might be really developed in other areas, might be completely lacking in public transit, whereas much more quaint cities, lesser known cities, might have amazing public transit. So it's really, as they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it's best for anyone listening to experience as much transit as they can, because then you'll also gain a greater perspective of what is good and what is bad in the first place.
Yeah, excellent. So I mean,
Well, I guess hopefully all of you listening gained some perspective of what could be considered a really good trend system and maybe informed a decision. I don't know, but hopefully you had some takeaways as to what makes good systems and also what cities have done well.